If you've been following my channel, you've seen me build Django apps using a built-in command like Django admin start project my app, which goes ahead and creates a bunch of boilerplate code for you and scaffold out a perfectly working Django app. The same goes for React and Next.js. If you've seen my video on those, you know that you can use npx create React app my app or npx create Next app my app to again scaffold out a perfectly working React or Next.js app. In fact, I'll go so far to cover something like subprocess or cookie cut to create a command line tool that can build out a good starting template for projects I commonly use, and those videos are also on my channel. That is great, but today we're doing something more ambitious. We use GPT 3.5 to achieve something like a universal project builder. In the author's own words, it's like a create anything app instead of create Django or create React app. This is a pretty interesting idea, as its goal is not to just generate a few isolated lines of code, but to build out entire software with a proper directory structure and everything. So just hearing myself say that sounds like a pretty ambitious goal already. So let's see what it says on its own README file. So on the project page itself, it says this is engineering with prompts rather than prompt engineering. I think it's a pretty fitting description. So if you read the workflow, it says human writes a basic prompt. This could be in Markdown format, so you just write it in normal Markdown. Everyone knows how to write Markdown. So you write that in Markdown. You say, oh, this is what I want to build. This is how it looks like. This is the kind of features I want to have. And then the main.py will generate the code. So we're going to take a look at main.py in a second. But then the human run the code, and then you can read and simply add to the code, paste the error if you get into any error, and just continue doing that. So human writes a bit of prompt in Markdown, generative AI goes ahead, build that thing out for you so that you can iteratively add onto the prompt or to continue to flesh out the project, or just take over and write your own code, right? It's pretty wild. So let's do a quick start and see if this actually works. So let's go ahead and just do a git clone, put in the URL, and this is a pretty small file. It's a pretty light file, so if you see like the size of it, it should take you less than 2-3 seconds. Okay, so once it's done, you could just change directory into the developer, clear the screen out. Now let's do an ls real quick to see what is in here. You see there's a few files here. The one that you want to pay attention to is the main.py and the main no model.py. Right, so these are the two files that we're going to be primarily working with. So there is the requirements.txt. So if you haven't done that, you could activate your environment and then just go ahead and do a pip install -r requirements.txt. This is going to bring in all the dependencies. But honestly, apart from OpenAI itself, there's not really a lot else in there. So if you have been following along this LLM series, then most likely you already have what it takes. Let's go ahead and see what it wants anyways. Everything is already satisfied, so that's good, right? So we don't really have to install anything else. Let's go back to ls. What I want to see is I want to do ls.a. -a basically shows me all of the files, including the hidden files. So if I show all the files, including the hidden file, I will see a .example.env, and let's go ahead and print that out. So you could use bat, you could use cat, whichever one you prefer. So in here, the env file, the .example.env file, they only have one line, and this one line itself is just OpenAI _API key equals to, and then you pass in your own API key. So you want to do that. So what I choose to do is I'm going to keep the .example.env file. I'm instead going to create my own env file, and then I'm going to paste in my key. So this part of the video is going to be hidden out, but then I'm going to fast forward for 10 seconds, and then you won't see my keys, but you should go ahead and add your own. So you should do something like OpenAI API key, and then you pass in your own key. So I'm going to speed up this video a little bit just to hide out this area, and then we zoom back in here. And I'm done, so it takes about 30 seconds. It's a pretty fast operation. You just add one line of code. In that one line of code, you have your OpenAI API key, then you paste in your own API key. Alright, that's it. Now that you're done, you can just confirm that everything is there. So you see the ls-a again, that stands for all. You see now there is an env file, and there's the example.env file. So this is the file that you just created. Alright, that's great. Now there's a few things you can do to source whatever is in the env file to bring them into your current session. What I like to do is I typically go something like export, and then I say take all of the arguments, right? Take everything from the env file and then use that redirect to redirect them back in here and then export them out. So this is what I like to do, and that is going to bring in everything it finds from env file, and it's going to direct them into xargs, which is arg stands for arguments, and then it's going to export all of them. And now remember there is two files that we're looking at, main.py and main no model.py. Let's take a look at what the docs say about this. We did the git clone, then we copied over the example.env to env, filling in our own API keys. There are no Python dependencies to wrangle if you choose to use model. So model.com, I'm not going to go too much into this. I can probably make a video talking about model.com and all of the features in it, and that would be a separate thing, but I don't want to divert too far away from what I'm trying to show you today. You can optionally though have GPT-4. If you have GPT-4 access, you can go ahead and use that. But the project would default to using GPT 3.5-Turbo. So it's up to you what you want to pick here. But what we're gonna do, because I don't want to go into all of the details of nitty-gritties of model.com, I'm not gonna explain what it is. I'm gonna use the project without model.com. So without model.com, what you need to do is to install the requirements. I've done that already. You've seen me done that just now. And then just export that. So this is what we did earlier, this export. And then the last one is Python main no model.py, your prompt here. So this is the file that you want to run. Okay, so we've done the pip install. We've seen that up there. And we've done the export. This is kind of taking all the environment variables and making them available in your session. And then finally, now we're ready to go and run the main no model.py. Right, let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to say Python main no model, and I'm going to complete the rest for me. So a create React app that is modern, elegant, and styled with Bootstrap CSS. Offering a simple form to RSVP to the wedding. Form has following fields: first name, last name, checkbox, indicating a +1. Okay, so I want to mention about this thing. If I were to, now when I try something like checkbox indicating a +1 that the guest would like to bring to the wedding, then if I were to write this, let me show you what happens. So I'm going to hit enter, and this is what the prompt is going to say. Let me zoom out a bit so you can see the whole thing. After a few debugging, it has to do with these characters right here. So let me exit this out. So it's generating this, and you see that it's trying to do that continuously. So it says, it lists out the steps in each step, right? So it first change directory, npm start, npm install bootstrap, make directory, and then it adds those into source components. If you're a React developer or if you've done any kind of work in React, these are very familiar steps that you would take yourself. But it's doing all of this for you. So I'm going to explain in a second what the code base actually does. We're going to look into the source code itself. But for now, this is the step that it's going through, all right? So it says, okay, this is what you requested for. Here's a create React app that is modern, elegant, and styled with Bootstrap CSS, offering a simple form to RSVP to the wedding. Form has following fields: first name, last name, checkbox, indicating a +1 that the guest would like to bring to the wedding. The project started through npm start, so make sure there's a corresponding package.json file. A few times I forgot to add the last part, and then there is no package.json, and you end up having to use node and nodemon and all that crap. So you don't want to do that. You just want to say, hey, add a package.json file, make it modern, so it's easy to start. And here it does that. So this is a list of things that it needs to do. So you first have to create React app, my wedding RSVP. Then it cd to that name that it created for you. So my wedding RSVP, it created a project with that name and it changed directory into that directory. Then it says npm start and npm install bootstrap, and then it make directory. Now I'm not very sure if these are the necessary sequence I would go into, but let's keep it there and see what it will give us. Then it would make directory into source components. It would create a form, create an input, create a button, create a checkbox, and create a thank you. Then it has an app.js, index.js, and index.css, and then it creates a package.json. The files that we have decided to create are, and it gives you a list of them, the shared dependencies between those files are, and it needs to know all of this because otherwise you wouldn't be able to install that and run it. So it needs to create that, and then it put them into a markdown. It said these are the dependencies that you want to have. Then the files we have decided to generate are, and again give you that. So let's scroll down. It generates the code for you. All of this code will be in the generated folder. So if you scroll down, this is all done, and seems like it has no problem this time. So an earlier version of that would throw an error because of the +1. It will not be able to pass this plus properly, so I end up using the plus, the plus, spell it out. But now it seems it's working, so it's great. And all of this is done. So let's go ahead and ls again. And now you will see there is a folder called generated. Now this is a directory called generated. This is where all of the source code is stored for you. So all of the code that it generates for you throws into generated. So if you want to, you could open up your code editor, go into generated, and take a look at the files that it has generated for you. So let me do that. Alright, so we opened up the generated folder. There's a few subdirectories within the generated directory itself. So you have the My Wedding RSVP, that's what it created for you. There's the node modules. These are all the different node modules, all the dependencies in here. You need to install them. And then there's a public folder. That's where your fonts, your images, all of the stuff, ICO, your JSON, all of that goes into. And there's a background as well. There's a logo. I honestly don't have any idea how it generates a logo and a background, but we could maybe prompt it later. Okay, then there's the components under the source folder. There's the form CSS, form.js. All of these looks pretty standard to me. They don't look unusual. So let's take a look at form.js. It uses the stock components package to do all of the styling for you, and then use Formic. There's a lot of form libraries that allows you to, because doing form is one of the most common things as a front-end developer. You have to deal with forms, work with forms, and so there are a lot of libraries. Forming is one of those that are quite popular. I'm not sure if it's the most popular, but it's definitely in the top 3. So it brings that in for you. It brings the start components. This is also one of the top 3 methods of working with styles. A lot of people swear by using start components, put everything in start so that you could then reference them in your code. So all of that is done correctly, and it does yup. And yup allows you to do something like checking for the schema, making sure that the things are correct. So in this case here, it says that the first name is required. It has to be a string. The second one, make sure that it's also a string, but it also says last name is required. Let's see what else. But these are pretty modern method of writing a React app. If you're using React 16 and onwards, you don't need this anymore. You could remove the React. Import React from React. You don't need that anymore unless it's actually referenced that way. No, it's not. So you could actually remove the first line of code. But everything else seems pretty standard. App.css, again, background color. I'm not sure I want this background color, but I don't know. Let's keep it here, and if we don't like it, we can remove that. And that's kind of the nice thing about using this this tool here, is that GPT 3.5 goes ahead, generate all of that for you, but all of this is transparent to you. Anyway, it's kind of like a white box. You go in there, you change things up, you take over the code, you change the content, the styling, all of that is up to you. So think of it like a scaffolding. App.js is there, my wedding RSVP, welcome to my wedding. So say welcome to my wedding. Usually people like to have something very cheesy and like welcome to like Sam, X, or whatever, right? But let's keep it non-cheesy. Let's keep it to my wedding, and let's save it. And I think that's kind of it. I didn't make any other changes apart from the H1. Okay, so I'm gonna open up terminal again. I'll hide the debug console. I will first go into the generated folder to make sure I'm in the generated folder. So this is the generated folder, right? And in here, if I look at the package.json, tells me these are all the dependencies. So I will need to install all of them anyway. So let's go ahead and just do that. Let's say npm install. Okay, so that is going to look at all the dependencies, and there is any def dependency. There is no def dependency. So there's a Formic, React DOM, React scripts. These are pretty obvious. Let's go ahead and run that and wait for it to complete. And it's done. So it installed, changed one package or installed the rest, check for a few vulnerabilities, and then tells you that if you want to fix anything, you can. Let's not fix anything right now. Let's just run and see if this whole thing even works in the first place. I could do an npm start now. And sure enough, my app boots up. It has the welcome to my wedding. I will say the welcome to my wedding. The font itself, this is not, this is black. It's actually a pro choice. So I want to change that to maybe something like golden. So let's change that right now in the script. So here, the class name is app. So it's coming from app.css. So let's go and find that. And let's find the h1. And since there's no h1, we just have to hit h1 color. And what's amazing is it immediately compiles successfully. So if I go back to my browser, I can see that it's gonna be reflected almost right away. So that's great. Now let's take a look at the console while we try to fill up some of this form and see what's happening, all right? First of all, it's mobile responsive, so it looks okay. But I mean, this part can be fixed, can change this a bit. Now if I try to just simulate the form itself, so right now my console has nothing, right? Let me just enter my name, Sam, Chan, and I'm gonna just add this, and I'm gonna click submit. Let's see what's happening. So it basically prints that out right now in the console. It's a first name Samuel, last name Chan, and then +1 is a true. Now if I take that away and Michael Scott. Now this time I'm gonna put a negative to this, and I'm gonna say submit, and now it takes first name Scott and then +1 equals to false. So that's great. That gives us a really good start, because what I want to do next is I want to actually go ahead and generate a second version of this, and I want this to be actually stored into a static JSON file. But I'm not even going to bother with a database, because that's probably going to be too much work. So I'm going to use either SQLite or just use a JSON file, and say every time somebody submits to that, just take this information and log them into my JSON, my database, or my SQLite. Alright? So that's kind of my second version. But before we do that, let's take a look at how it's doing what it's doing, alright? What kind of prompt engineering magic is here? Alright, let's take a look at the code itself again. Okay, so I said we were gonna go look into main.py. So this is main.py. It has the import model. This is not what we use, because model.py is actually going to do something like model.stop and then model.image, the Debian, and then it's going to install that into a container. Then this container is in the cloud. Then you type your credit card in there. There's a subscription and stuff. I'm not going to even go into that model itself because I feel like it just opened up a new kind of worms. I need to explain a lot of other things that it takes away. It's kind of a distraction at this point. So don't want to talk about that. We go into main no model.py. So main no model.py is kind of similar to main.py, and again, if you look at everything it's doing, it's really just less than about 230 lines of code. But if you remove away the import statements and you remove away all the doc strings and stuff, all of this stuff, it's about 150 to 200 lines of code. It's actually really, really small. Alright, so let's take a look at the main no model.py, right? Let's see. Okay, it has these are all standard Python stuff. There's nothing here that really needs explaining. Sys, system, OS, operating system, time, utils. Okay, utils, there's a clean directory. Now this is interesting, constant. So I want to open that up and put them maybe next to each other. So I'm going to put this on the side so I can talk about that. Actually, let's close this out first and then we can go into that. Okay, so if you see what it does, you see that it tried to generate this. It says 86 tokens in prom, 68 tokens in prom. So where did that come from, right? So this is actually here. So it says how many tokens in prom, it styles it. This is a bit of coloring, adding a few colors, maybe adding some characters and stuff. Then it passes in the Open API key, which is here, right? The OpenAI API key. And then it takes the messages and you append any messages so that they can print it up to your system. If it failed, it would try to regenerate the response in 30 seconds. So you sleep for 30 seconds and then do a retry. So you don't want to keep on trying immediately. You want to maybe wait for a bit and then you retry. Okay? Maybe when the API is too busy, we don't want to fail everything. Just want it to retry later and not actually really exiting. Okay? Then when you finally got all the reply, take all of that, put that in the content. So where do you get the reply from? So that is from your OpenAI at the top, the OpenAI chat completion. Right? So if you've actually been following this series, you've seen me use OpenAI chat completion before. You've seen how we could use OpenAI and stuff and then just create some sort of this. If you use OpenAI library itself, this is maybe 4 or 5 lines of code and it's all done. Here it's just adding a lot of context, making things a lot richer before you try to generate a response from OpenAI. But itself on its own, it's actually really, really straightforward. It's just OpenAI.chat completion, try to do a create. This is something you've seen before in other parts of my videos as well. So I'm going to keep that there. Then it says generate file. Now before it generate file, it adds this, it sort of prepend this generate response to it. So it says you are an AI developer who is trying to write a program that will generate code for the user based on their intent. The app is this, and then give the prompt. The files we have decided to generate are this. And so that's what I was explaining earlier when you see me go through the prompt. This is the list of different files that it's trying to generate for you. And then it says also to the files that we've decided to generate are this, the shared dependencies are this, and only write valid code for the given file path and file type and return only the code. Do not add any other explanation, only return valid code for that file type. Then it adds a few more. It says we have broken up the program into per file generation. Now your job is to generate only the code for the file, and then it continues to do does all this. So this is kind of where the magic happens actually. It's really just trying to do some sort of prompt engineering, but then allowing you to engineer, to build software using prompts. And so this is the main. It says, hi, it's me, the SMOL developer, and you see the emoji. This is what you see in a printed terminal as well. So if you remember, this is it, right? There's the emoji. It says the SMOL developer. You said you wanted this, a create React app that is modern, elegant, and start with Bootstrap CSS, offering a simple form to set the RSVP to the wedding. So this is great. All right. Now the other file I want to look at is the one called constants. So let's open that up. Constants.py. So these are the few things that we look at. So extensions to skip, default directory generated. So this is actually the directory you should be looking for. So here the default is generated. So it's going to take everything you generate and throw them into generated. But if you want to name it something else, you can call it something else as well. Then the default model, it says here we recommend GPT-4 if you have it. GPT 3.5 is going to be not as good at generating code, so we strongly recommend GPT-4. I know most people don't have access. We are working on a hosted version. All right. That's okay. So right now you can change this if you want. I'm using the default setting for everything. I have access to GPT-4, but I also want to just use the default setting right now before we change too much of things. And default max tokens. Here the author also write that I wonder how to tweak this properly. We don't want it to be max lang as it encourages verbosity of code, but too short and the code also truncates suddenly. All right. So that's a few things that you can tweak if you want to. So this you could change to GPT-4, generated can change that to something else, and 2000, I don't know if there's a reason. If you kind of want to just experiment with it, feel free to change it to something else and then see whether the results are better off or worse off, right? So I'm going to close all of this. Now SMOL also said that if there is no command line argument provided, then the file prompt.md exists, then the main function will automatically use the prompt.md file. All other command line arguments are left as default. So what we can do instead of putting our prompt here is we just have to omit them. And so we said Python main no model.py, and it's going to find the prompt.md. Now unfortunately, if you use this kind of setup, you can't actually name this anything else apart from prompt.md because it's kind of hard coded in there. But if you use the model, then you can pass in model run main.py, you can specify your prompt, or you can put -- prompt and then the name of your prompt. In this case here, right, we only have the one without model.com, so we don't really have a choice here, but we have to name it prompt.md. So this is what I'm gonna do. I will take this and I will rename this to prompt.o.md or prompt.original.md. So that's the one that it comes with, right? If you want to take a look at it, you can click into it and you can take a look at it. So it says here it's a Chrome manifest v3 extension that reads the current page, offers a pop-up UI that has the page title, content, text area, and a prompt. So it tries to use this, the author actually used this to create a Chrome extension. So if you want to actually follow along, you can do that. But this is basically just a markdown. So instead, I'm going to go ahead and create a new file called prompt.md. So this is going to be our prompt.md, and I'm going to paste all of my content in there. So this is it. So the top part is kind of the same, except I added a few more details here. So I said a create React app that is modern, elegant, mobile responsive, and start with Bootstrap CSS, offering a simple form to RSVP to a Christmas party. Instead of a wedding, I'm going to change it to a Christmas party. The project is started through npm start, so make sure there's a corresponding package.json file. This app has 3 sections, then I list out the 3 sections. The first section, I want a hero header, RSVP form. The second one is the attending list, and the third one is a costume contest and gift exchange. Let's save all of this and let's run it. So I still have my npm running here. I want to close that out, clear the screen, and we are gonna say Python main _ no _ model.py without the prompt, just so that it can read from the prompt.md and do its work, right? So it's gonna overwrite all of the stuff that I have in generated, and that's okay. So let's go ahead and run it. Okay, so it's already starting to generate all of that for us. So let's see. This is what it's going to generate for us. It's going to have package.json, public, and in the public, it has, public is where you store all your static files, your assets, your images, your banner, your index, your whatever statics are in there, okay, mp3, whatever. So fav icon, that's your favorite icon. That's the one that appears on the top of the browser. Then the index.html. Then in your source, it has the app.js, app.css, index.js, very similar to what we have earlier, right? Very similar to the first example that we run. Then we have the components. In the components, this is very nice. It breaks into very modular style. So it generates a header, then a form, and then an attending list, costume contest, share model. Now, where is the share model come from? Here in my prompt, I said when the user hits submit, the form payload is written to a local JSON file. Offer a share button that opens a model with a link to this website that can be copied to the clipboard. And these are the dependencies that it says we need, right? React, Bootstrap, CSS, Unsplash API similar. Where did Unsplash come from? So at the top here, I said that the section has a low opacity background image of a Christmas tree, sourced from Unsplash API or similar, anything, all right? So Christmas party RSVP, a create React app that is modern, elegant, all right? I'm gonna try and run this app first, and if I succeed, then I'm gonna go in there and explain what this does, and then compare it to what a professional programmer would have written, and maybe how I feel about the code quality that it generated. Okay, so let's take a look at, let's get it running. So cd to generated ls, there is a package JSON. So if you open that up, let's take a look at the dependencies. There's only React, Bootstrap. Alright, so there's only 3 dependencies. Interesting. So I'm gonna say npm install. And it will only install the 3 packages because it only uses the 3 packages. So React DOM, Bootstrap. Alright. No vulnerabilities, that's always nice. It's npm start.def. React scripts start is not found. So let me open up package.json and maybe inspect this better. So package.json, this one. Alright, so what happened when I call npm start is it's going to look at this start and then it's going to call this. If I say npm build, it's going to call this npm test, and you can add your own. For example, you can add dev, and you can say when I do this, do certain things. When I say build, do certain things. When I say, you can add your own. So any kind of, if you've been programming in JavaScript, or you've seen my other JavaScript tutorials or ES6 tutorials, I've actually explained a lot of these concepts before. This is not really a JavaScript tutorial, so I don't want to dive too much into the details of this. But basically, these are just kind of, think of it as aliases, as shortcuts. So when I say npm start, I'm expecting it to run this, but here it says React scripts is not found. So I do need to install React scripts. So let's go ahead, add that in, npm I stands for install. That's kind of like your pip install. It's kind of the same thing in Python. You say pip install, install from the PyPI, npm install from the node package registry. So let's wait for it to complete. All right, let's go ahead and start. So immediately I see there's a couple of problems here. Now, I won't say a lot of problems, but there are a couple of packages that are not in here. So for example, can't resolve Axios, can't resolve React Bootstrap, can't resolve React Bootstrap in jQuery. So there's a few things here that are not, it didn't generate kind of the right code for it, right? There's missing some dependencies here. So what I can do is I can quickly try and fix it and add those dependencies in there and then do a reinstall again. Okay, so the fix is quite simple. I just have to install the dependencies because I did the npm install. It updates it for me. So I have Bootstrap, jQuery, Axios. This is for API, making API calls. I'm not sure if this is actually required. I suspect you don't actually need this. These two comes with React as well, and that's kind of it. I think that's the only thing you need. If I look at attending list, it gave me an error as well. So when I look into it, the thing that I just added was I make sure that it says you'd only do the map if the length is more than 0. So if it's an empty array, or if it's a none, for example, if it's a none, in this case it would be a null, then you don't want to call the dot map, because how can you map something from a null? So you don't want to, if this is undefined or something, then you don't want to have the map there, right? So here I'm saying that check for the length. If it's greater than 0, then you do this. So this is kind of basically an AND operand here. So this says that if this is true, then try to evaluate to see if this is also true. So this would be executed. If this is not true, then don't run the second part. Okay, so I just have to add that, and that's kind of it. Everything else is good. I mean, there is a few warning, but it's a warning. It's not really an error. So let's take a look at what it generates for us. So this is the app, right? There's the first name, last name. I'm bringing a +1. Now the thing is that it doesn't really have all the CSS and stuff. So one of the things that it does as well is it generates this background image, but it's actually not calling it from the Unsplash API. Instead, it expects us to have a Christmas tree.jpg within our public folder. And in our public folder, there is nothing in there. I guess you could just find a Christmas tree somewhere on the internet, and maybe this one. I guess we're just gonna keep it that way. So if we actually look at our website now, it doesn't look that bad. RSVP form, the form though is a little bit messed up. I would prefer all the form names to be white. So if you want to just add a form label and change all of them, the form label, change all of them to have a white color. We're gonna change this color to be white, or FFF, similar. Want to spell label correctly, so BL. So now all of this is going to be white. The share this link is also going to have to be changed there. That is actually a model title, so let's also add a dot model title. So you can see that it takes a bit of work, but it does scaffold out something, and you can continue to add to it and continue to improve on that. Adding your own CSS style, changing things, it can be a pretty good get started, get sort of a get start. Alright, let's look at the rest of the features now. Before, I could spend all day doing the CSS. It would take me about like 30 minutes to get all of this fixed up, but I wouldn't want to do that right now, because it's not really the main focus of this video. Instead, what we do is we close this out. So I have the first name, last name. Let's take a look at the prompt again. This is the prompt. So the hero header, I asked it for 3 different sections. The first section is the hero header RSVP form. I asked it for an RSVP form within the hero header, and now that I think of it, maybe it shouldn't have been that. I should maybe have this as a second section. So the first section is just a hero header. Second section, RSVP form. Regardless, in RSVP form, we have the first name, last name checkbox indicating a +1 that the guest would like to bring to the party. So I'm gonna open up my console and see if things are working out there. So I'm gonna try and enter my first name again, Samuel Chan, and I'm gonna say I'm bringing a +1 and I'm gonna submit. So okay, so immediately I get an Axios error. It says that there is a bad request and stuff, yada yada. Okay, let's see what's happening there. Okay, so here I want to put a pause and mention about this, explain about this use case here, right? So first of all, reading and writing JSON file to a local storage, if you're doing it on Node.js, it's actually quite easy. It's just a tiny piece of backend API. You can create an Express server and get this job done fairly easily, right? If you're running this on a browser environment, the client, the browser itself, now the browser doesn't have access to the file system, so you won't be able to achieve that. So you will need to circumvent that using some sort of Node.js and server on the back end, and then create an API endpoint to help you write to that. So if you're using next.js, you can do that by creating a server and then create this API endpoint and delegate to the API endpoint to write it into your local JSON file. This is quite simple. We do that a lot in my day-to-day work. But here, if I were to introduce that, it becomes a little bit complicated. So I don't want to go into that, right? So there's something I could add on. And if you've seen my other React videos, you've probably seen me explain about those processes. Now I'm going to keep it here, and I will open up my data.json. So I'm going to try and add my guest here. So to simulate that, I'm going to have my first name. If I show you the payload, it's going to be an object with first name, last name, +1. So I will try to have this similarly. So here's my first name, Samuel. Then I have my last name. So that's assuming that the feature is already done. I'm able to write this into the file, and then I'm gonna have my +1, and this is gonna be a true or false. So let's add true in this case, right? So I'm gonna save that. Then I have to rewrite this guest section, because if I pay attention to my JSON data, so that's my data, the JSON, it actually stores everything under the key guest here. So I will need to look into the guest. This would give me the array, not the guest itself. This is just an object. So without this, it just be testing the object length itself. Doesn't make sense. You want to test the array length. And then I do the map here. The rest is the same, right? Just change the names here. So now I have the file being read into the front end. And then I also have the costume contest and gift exchange. So if I look at my prompt, the last section of the prompt, I said pulls a random Pokemon from the Pokemon API and suggest that the user dress up as that Pokemon for the costume contest. Also randomly assign the user a gift exchange partner from the list of guests who have RSVP'd in data.json. Make sure that the app includes the links to Bootstrap CDN and jQuery. So that's kind of it. It's a 15 lines prompt. It's not a lot of prompt. But here it says pulls a random Pokemon, and here it does that as well. It says dress up as Machoke for the costume contest. If you don't know what a Machoke looks like, he looks like this. So if you want to dress up like that for Christmas and be ridiculed by everyone, then feel free, use the app, go and dress up like that. The gift exchange partner is not successful, but if I refresh that page, so if there is nothing, it will just be a 0. So let's save this like this. So this is gonna say if it's nothing, then do nothing, but if there is something, then use the dot and then chain it there. Alright, so I think if I refresh that again though, it says now dress up as Flygon for the costume contest. I think Flygon is less ridiculous. And see if there's any... Yeah, I mean you can dress up like that. There's no problem with this. If you want to dress up like a Flygon, probably works better if you're a female, if you're a girl, if you're a guy, maybe not. You definitely don't want to go in like that, shop like that. I don't think it makes you any more popular in the party. But there you go. So kind of a very simple app, right? It generates, it does that for you, and we did all of this within, 10-15 minutes if you count time, it takes to generate the code for you. But I think more importantly than what it generates for you here is kind of the notion of being able to go from just generating a single snippet of code using GPT-3, right? It goes from there to generating a whole full-blown directory. Look at that. It's a very reasonable project structure. So we have the public folder. This is where you store all of the files, your static, your images, your videos. If you have a background running GIF, all of those things goes into your public. Okay, your images, your background, logo, and then you have your fave icon. So all of these things, right? They all go into the public folder. This is very similar to how a lot of front-end projects are currently structured. Then there's a source folder, SRC. So source contains all of your source codes. And typically, if you run through any kind of React project or Next.js project, you see a components library. In components, we have the attending list, which is this. So if I were to comment a little bit, right? The modern way of doing React, we probably don't use the React import anymore. So if you're using an updated version of React, you can omit this, you don't need this anymore. So you just have to import useState, useEffect. In fact, let's look at the useEffect. If you don't need the console log, you can remove that. Where is the data from? Well, in that case, you will want to have this data as a dependency array. And there are probably better ways to do this. If you're using next.js, then there is better way to actually take the data from data.json and load them into your component, inject them into a component, rather than using useEffect. So you could also remove this. It takes all of the gas that you get in here and it sort them, and then it returns this. So it first check that, okay, gas, right, that's the key. If you look at the data, which is in here, right, this is an object, right? This object itself, in Python we call it dictionary, but in JavaScript we call it object. So the object itself has one key, and that's gas. In that, it has one value, and that value maps to an array. This could be many different attendees. So we have many different attendees. Each attendees would be an object, and they would have 3 attributes: the first name, the last name, and whether the +1 is true or false. And it basically goes to the lang. It says if it's more than 0, then do the map. If it's not, do nothing. Okay, that's fair. So let's save this, quit this out. That's the first one. Then the second one is costume contest. I'm going by alphabetical order here. So alphabetical order A, C, F, H, S. I'm not going by the logical order right there. And let's take a look here. It first, again, this is probably not necessary. And useEffect here is fair. It uses axios.get. It tries to find the first 1000, and then it generates a random Pokemon. It says, you know, from here, find me a list of Pokemon, find a random Pokemon, get that, and then take the name of that Pokemon, and then say, okay, here, cosplay as this Pokemon. You may end up with guests coming and cosplay as the same Pokemon, but it's quite unlikely because there are maybe 1000 of them, so there's a lot of different Pokemon. It's quite unlikely that you end up getting the same, unless it's like a Pikachu, then everyone dresses Pikachu. Form.js, we don't use Axios here. We haven't figured this out yet. We can do that after the recording, but we do that later. Then we have the React. This, again, I mentioned about this. You don't need this anymore. You just have to worry about the use state now. The rest is pretty straightforward, but there are a lot of like use state here. So there's better patterns to do this nowadays. You either use a context to manage all of them. You use a reducer or something like the reducer hook. You could use that and manage all the 4 states. You could also have one state being just the name, and then you could have this as, instead of just a string, you can have this as an object. So not just a primitive string anymore, but you can have a first name, and then you can have your last name. So this is how you initialize that, right? Then you could use a set state to sort of set either the first or the last. You can also do that. But if you want to have primitive, you can also do that. So there's a lot of choices here. So take a look at the rest. It's pretty straightforward. The prevent default is necessary because otherwise it would try to refresh, but there are also better patterns to do it now. There are better libraries to do it now. If you're using next.js, it handles that for you as well. The rest are pretty straightforward. When the form is checked, then this value, you know, adds this value. If every time that the form, this button, I'm bringing a +1 button, every time it's changed, this onChange function is going to be triggered. So that's okay, that's fair. Let's close that out. And then header.js is also pretty straightforward. Again, you don't need this. I commented about this before. I said you don't need this anymore in modern React. You don't need that anymore. You can omit that. Not necessary, but the function is there. RSVP form is there. This is very fair, very straightforward as well. The last one is share model. We haven't got to look into it, but that's fine. And then finally, we look at data.json. So it generates the components, it creates 5 different components, put them in the components directory, and then it generates a directory called data, and it puts data.json in there. And we explained about this before. App.css looks pretty straightforward. Global styles, add a few fonts for you, change a few colors for you. Background image, this is the first thing we need to change. We realize that it tries to read it in from the public. You could do it one or two ways. You could just put the remote URL here and ask it to read from that remote source. You could also just download that and then put them into images, make sure that you check the copyrights and stuff. Then finally we have the app.js. App.js should really only do one thing. Usually the modern JavaScript pattern now is that you don't want to have app.js being very bloated with a lot of logic. You don't want to have that. Instead, what the app.js should do is it should bring in all your components. So the header, the form, attending list, costume model, and share model. It should lay them out like that and then arrange them in the format. So for example, I don't want a header to go before the form. I want the form to be at the last. I could move it down here. And I want the costume components to go higher up. I could move it up there. So this is really where you move things around, and really the app.js itself should really be concerned about this. It shouldn't be trying to do too much of logic because everything else should be isolated into its own component, has its own separation of concerns. So app.js really just care about bringing all of them together into a div and call it app or something, just like a main container. And then finally index.js. This is very short. it should be something like this. This is all it needs to worry about. Find the element, right? Go to index.html, look for the root, right? Find the ID by root, and then just inject the whole app. That's all it's doing. It should only have one job, and the job is very precise, very succinct, and it's just looking at the root and then inject app into it. Where did app come from? App is imported from this app, so it's referring to this folder, and this will bring in all of the components from there and lay them out nicely. That's it. So that's what it generates for us, right? From the top to the bottom, so generated. So let's go back to the website. We've seen this example here, right? Human writes a basic prompt for the app they want to build. Main.py generates the code. Human runs or reads the code. Human can simply add to the prompt. As they discover underspecified parts of the prompt, they can manually run the code. These are things that we do, right? We found out, oh, we can add this, or we can maybe fix this. Then we identify error. You can paste the error into the prompt just like they would file a GitHub issue. So there is this thing called a SMOL Debugger. This is a beta feature, very MVP, just a proof of concept really. But what it does is you can feed the error and you say, well, I got this error. What is happening? And it would try to troubleshoot for you. I haven't got to try this yet because I'm quite familiar with JavaScript. If I see something, I kind of know where to go to find the right answers. And then here are the innovations and insights. So Markdown is all you need. Markdown is the perfect way to prompt for whole program because it's easy to mix English and code. So you can write your Markdown as usual, you can add your code in there. It's copy and paste programming, teaching the program how to understand how to code around a new API. For example, we use the Pokemon API and it's pretty good at that. It figures that out, the Pokemon API. We didn't have to figure out how to we didn't have to give it any kind of URL or something. We just say go to the Pokemon API, get a random Pokemon, and suggest the person to dress up as that Pokemon to a party. You don't want people to dress up as a Pokemon to your wedding, but a Christmas party is okay probably. It's a pretty interesting project, I would say. It's pretty ambitious compared to a lot of the things that we've done in the past with GPT-3, generating like a poem, writing a game, creating things like asking it to write the story dialogue or generating fantasy world artwork for our games and stuff. We've done a lot of these projects before. Then we use GPT to sort of summarize our journals, our diaries. But compared to all of these previous projects, this one takes a very big step up. It go ahead and generate a whole project directory for you, a project structure for you, and then it tries to fill up the dependencies and then tie everything together into one file or multiple files, and then you get to run it. And we're only using GPT 3.5. If you want to go ahead and try GPT 4, you can definitely do that. And let me know in the comments whether it works out for you well or not. And that's all I want to show you today. I guess I'll see you in the next video. Bye.